Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and today we are going to talk to Adam al-Sirgany and learn a bit about his workshop that he will be leading at the Collins Writers Conference this summer. Thanks for hanging out with me, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
I just want to get right into conference things. Um, what do you love about short stories? Why do you write short stories?
Oh man, I think short stories are really the intersection of, right, like the sort of human need to communicate through narrative and the sort of artistic need for concision and poetics. And there's something so potent about a great short story where you can enter a world efficiently and then um, like travel through a whole experience in a brief period of time and kind of digest that. And I don't know, I love that, right? It's the literary equivalent to like a really great day of people watching. Right?
That is not how I expected you to end that sentence, and I love it. Um, I also think that that's probably the best description of a short story I've ever heard. Um, because I think that if it's a like you said, a great short story, we are we are getting, a microcosm, and it's
Yeah,
all it's all real and it all hits. And I think that's really exceptional to be able to do in a small space.
yeah.
Um, why do you think people should be writing in general, but especially maybe short stories? Talk
Yeah.
about why we should read them too, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons people should write, right? Like I think the act of writing is a way of slowing down your thinking. Especially right like in our contemporary world, it's very easy to get hit with like ping, 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 right? Or like scroll, scroll, scroll of like all this stuff going on. But I think even generations that weren't exposed to TikTok, right? Like that ability to sit down and like process a thought and then refine a thought and expand a thought into a space until you've like said what you meant and meant what you said can be really, really crucial. I mean, I alluded to this in your previous question, but I also do think, right, like the sort of quintessentially human act is to engage in narrative, right? Like I've got a dog and I love my dog and I think she's very smart and interesting, but I think like how I imagine her mental landscape is way more like okay, noise, find small space to hide or something, right? Um, and I think there's something really critical to our humanity wherein we can go noise, like what kind of noise? Where is it coming from? What are the qualities of that noise? What does that tell me about that noise? And then like what is that associated with? And am I safe? Is this like the best place to hide if I need to be hiding? Or like was it just like, you know, the like neighbor children like playing a game outside, right? And I obviously, right, like in a short story form, definitely in a novel form, we're going way farther than that kind of thing. But I do think it's part of how we engage with who we are, and it's part of how we practice those skills that make us who we are. And in that way, I think the more we do that for ourselves, the more we see how other people do that, the easier it is for us to connect with other people and connect with our own kind of internality and like what we're doing here and like all the sort of big existential questions that like emerge from why are there noises or like why is there anything at all? That's a really wildly abstract way to answer that question. But yeah, I think stories are what make us who we are is the short version of that. And I think knowing something about that is really crucial. There's a real spiritual element to that for me.
My favorite quote of all time is the truth about stories is that's all we are. That's from Thomas King and from his
Yeah.
book, The Truth About Stories. So hearing someone say that just like made my heart explode. I was gonna joke about like the example that you gave that you like boxed yourself in with about the noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I don't think it was really all that abstract. You just sort of you had to run with the metaphor you gave yourself.
Yeah. Totally.
But hard agree about stories. Um, so I want to my next question as I wrote it just plows right into the one after it.
Sure.
So I'm trying to phrase it well. But in your workshop, which I will read a description of here, many writers find themselves attached to the inevitably highly polished first few paragraphs of a piece and struggle to be open to making changes even though the now completed story may need something different in its first scenes than the writer originally envisioned. We'll boldly explore new beginnings for your existing stories, hoping to shape something that better fits where the story is actually headed. On the final day, we'll explore how these new beginnings may also inform revisions of the final paragraphs of our stories. Participants should, if possible, bring an existing story of theirs to work through in this workshop. I imagine it's also all right if they don't. I know probably we all have ideas, we all have drafts. I don't think it's like anybody's going to be, held back.
Yeah.
But moving into the question. Um, what is it about that first couple of paragraphs that we get? Well, how do we get stuck there? I guess I'll start there.
Yeah. So, there are real caveats to what I'm about to say, right? Like famously, John Irving starts with the last sentence of his novels and then works toward that last sentence. But I think most of us tend to start writing not only short stories, but any kind of fiction, often poetry as well, with like an idea or an image that sort of gets us going, right? And we sort of move from it, right? But also, I think there's this tendency that we have, most of us will type out our work now in the modern world or type out our work in the modern world. And so like we start and we read that paragraph, right? And then we like read that paragraph and then like we write our way a little bit farther and then we come back to the work and then we read that first paragraph and then we read what we continued and then we work a little farther. And so that beginning tends to get really, really polished up because we've seen it over and over and over again and we've thought about it and we've like played with it and we've moved the commas and we've changed the words. Um, from a craft perspective, that's so useful. And I think the easy thing to tell people is like, cool, now go polish all your other work and read all the rest of the work as many times as you've read the first paragraph or the first few paragraphs or your first few pages. And that is useful. Um, but oftentimes, I think along the way, we discover that our stories are about things other than sort of what we set out to tell. Right? And I guess an example of that might be, right, like if you go back and read like Guy Maupassant or something, right? Like those stories tend to be really like linear and very direct and like, okay, here's this thing happening, and then like here's the switch at the end, right? I found a clever way to get out of the thing that I'm talking about. And I think there's a lot of missed opportunities when we only do that to sort of open up, right? Like I started writing about my my sister and I started writing about my sister because I had this like memory of my sister. But along the way I realized what I was actually working through was like, you know, this time like an animal I loved ran away and I was very worried about it and what that said about my attachment style as a kid or whatever. And I think we tend to lose that because we're so determined to get this like sort of Joseph Campbell loop back to my sister or like these kind of like fixations on form that we're trying to do, and we get locked into that original space. Not unlike, here's my meager attempt to justify my bad example about my dog hearing a sound. Is like if I'm stuck on that, my dog hears a sound, and now I'm trying to extrapolate on that to make hopefully a more sophisticated point, but I can't get away from the metaphor. I'm stuck to the metaphor. And so I think it can really be beneficial to like conduct exercises, even if you don't end up using any of those exercises in the end, or you find out that the beginning was the right beginning, to look at some of the like middle text of a work and figure out what is my story actually trying to say? What are the images that actually drive this narrative? What's the sort of underlying like psyche of this text? Why am I writing it? And then go back and ask, where does this story actually begin if this is about the animal that ran away rather than my sister, right? And yeah, I think that that comes from a lot of different places about the ways we're trained to read. It comes that tendency to fixate on the beginning comes from, like really to overemphasize that section and not to like emphasize all of the text and all of the meaning that derives from narrative. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded explanation and probably not helping justify my dog metaphor. But
No, that was fantastic. I was really impressed with that. But also, this is a huge problem that I personally have. Um, maybe not. No, it's exactly that. And I actually my whole like critical element of my thesis was about was this. It was like 15 pages of me being like, I get really stuck on my initial concept and it sucks until I figure out what I'm actually doing. Um, so that really, really hit me. And I don't have any idea how to get there. I just like flail, and so I'm gonna be learning a lot, and I'm so glad.
cool.
A lot of my problems are like containers more than the actual language, where I think that I've got like a formal constraint that's really cool and it just does not fit. And
Yeah.
I want to do the cool thing and it's not.
Yeah, and I mean I think containers are probably really more malleable than we sometimes give them credit for, right? Like I'm really interested in how like TV writers work, both because it's collaborative in an interesting way, and often because, right, like someone who creates a show is like thinking about pitching someone the pilot episode of a work or maybe a season of a work. And if that expands into 4, 5, 6 seasons, there's this need to sort of reinvent, reimagine, go back and look at what was missed earlier and how it still feels like it moves and shapes. And so I think I've derived a lot of like lessons from sort of talking to people who work in other formats and who, from working in those other formats, discover new ways of interacting with a text and like making it new, so to speak.
So that's actually awesome because I feel like with short stories you have many more opportunities for okay, so when I say container, I mean like the concept that houses the story. I might mean that it is a formal constraint. Um, and I just feel like with short stories, you have many more opportunities because you don't have to, do it for 300 pages or whatever. And it can be a recipe. It can be the label on some, apparently I'm in a food mood, the label on a can of soup. It can be a PowerPoint or an epistolary, a letter or a diary entry. And I don't think that opportunity is available in long form as often. I've seen a lot of like long form projects that are in. Oop. um, that are like broken up into funny sections or different sections that have different formal constraints or whatever. Um, do you have any particular, I don't know, short story formal surprises that you've come across just since I'm on the topic? It's a pet topic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you mentioned PowerPoints, Jennifer Egan. I can't think of the title off the top of my head, but in A Visit from the Goon Squad does have this really interesting um, PowerPoint story that I'm really enamored of. And I think also, right, like it came out at a time when many of us were using PowerPoints pretty regularly in work or school, etc. So it really engaged with the time and a moment and a format that I think is pretty amazing, right? Like, my friend Dave Fitzgerald wrote an entire novel in the second person, and it's brilliant. It's called Troll, and I often I feel like it's become a sort of convention in contemporary short stories is to take a crack at least one short story in the second person. It's hard to sustain, even in the short form, right? And I think part of that's because um, I think it tends to work best when it's working as internality, really like you talking to yourself, like first person as the actual second person perspective. But it really traps the language sometimes to have to be in the first or second person because you have to get away from the introduction of the self in order to like um, tell your story. I'm a huge Amy Bender fan. And I mean, I think of her as kind of like a master of weird constraints. Oftentimes for her, that's the sort of fabulous narrative, or like Kevin Brockmeyer does a lot of this of like, here's a big like objective correlative in the middle of the story. And I really love those kind of like odd fashion constraints. I personally have this like my secret um, ongoing lifelong project in short story writing is to try to write a short story that fits in a single sentence, um, and like to cover that gamut. Um, and I think what that's done to my writing is to sort of persuade me to write incredibly long sentences. But I don't know that that's always for the good. But I do think there's something for me in that like seeing if I can distill something down and down and down and down and down and still leave um, the character in that way. I'm also a big fan of sort of, I've seen people try a number of really interesting projects where like the sort of famous one, I think this is at the Ohio State University, where an entire group of students had all written a story and they had to include an element where a cake was on the road, like a birthday or wedding cake. I can't remember which now. And that was always the like, it didn't matter where in the story it turned up, but I love those sort of like limited constraints because they let the story expand and then open up this opportunity for like weirdness and whimsy. I don't know if that's answering your question, but those are some examples of things that I'm fond of and think a lot about of like, how to introduce a bit of weird and goal into the thing. What kind of constraints are you giving yourself? Um,
I love that. No, I didn't plan to ask that question, so there's um no right, no wrong. Um, so I'll go with we'll say probably last question. What can folks expect from the workshop, or what do you hope they get from the workshop?
yeah. So in terms of expectations of the workshop, like you'd mentioned, right? Like I think most folks will probably have some work that they'll bring in, but it's all right if they bring just in ideas, um, because I've got a handful of projects that we're going to take and look at. We're going to sort of study on a couple of short stories and how they do open and where they go over time. And then we're going to sort of break our pieces into chunks and go through some exercises of sort of looking at, okay, in a very neutral way, what's a description of my story? How does it get from point A to point Z? And then by breaking apart scenes and breaking apart the sort of like movement and shape of our stories, once we've established what those shapes are, we're going to take a look at like what each section is doing. Um, my goal in doing some of that is to open up sort of everyone's minds to thinking about uh, what happens in the midst of those stories, not just from a character perspective, not just from a sort of like something had to happen here to keep it interesting perspective, but a like, why am I talking about this perspective? Why is this object in the room perspective? What's the sort of theme and like dynamo of my story's movement? Um, the hope there is to get us to a place where, after looking at that, we can reimagine new beginnings and write out some new beginnings and see how that impacts the progression of that story and see how that impacts the sort of dynamo and the movement and the like, um, the shift of that story, the thrust of that story. And ideally, at the end of the week, everyone either um, A has a beginning that better suits their work, um, or if they are happy with their beginnings, B, they have new places for that character to go and new starts for other angles at working through the characters within their story, or meaning, new angles for reapproaching the short story and adding to the narrative that they're working on. Like you said, right? Short form means that you get more cracks at it, right? Like you tried this container, and if you like this container, it doesn't mean that you can't also have this container. I think um, the cupboard of your characters is always pretty wide, right? It's a brilliant thing about, hi, buddy. It's a brilliant thing about the human mind is that it's not nearly limited as the space of our apartments, right? Like you can keep expanding.
That is so beautiful. I mean, it would be really weird, right, if someone dedicated their life to art and then just didn't enjoy it. But I love how you love the work. Is there anything I didn't ask that I shouldn't have? Wait, that I didn't ask that I should have? Anything you'd like to add? Um,
Yeah,
that I
not in particular. I think like I'd say that I'm apropos the workshop, I'm a I want to add that like some of the benefit of these kinds of exercises is that if we open up new angles for our characters, it also kind of helps build a collection of the work that we're doing by creating characters who interact, right? Like it's good to have your own Yoknapatawpha. And I also just want to shout out Sin Kitchen, who I'm super stoked to be working with way, way back in the day, around the time 10 Tongues came out, her first short story collection. She was my undergraduate advisor. So I'm looking forward to to getting to work with her and see what she does with everyone and hear some of her opinions on writing as well. So
Oh man, so I haven't met her and I am so excited. I hi. Uh I'm glad for your endorsement.
yeah, but no, thank you for hosting me. I'm excited about this. I'm excited to see people's stories, and I'm glad I got to hang out with you and your cat today.
Yeah, we had fun. Thank you. For more information, to register, to read up on all of the very cool things going on at the conference this summer, you can obviously go to our website, mwcqc.org. We also have some scholarships and tuition assistance available. And you know, if you have questions, hit us up. Uh, yeah, thank you so much for hanging out, Adam.
Thank you.